Hello everyone, my turn to continue explaining the flow on how we are going to strategize. I'm going to talk about how we scope, how we can identify our vision, and based on that how we can use the challenges and opportunities that we have developed to come up with strategies that we want to adopt for a limited time span of 3 to 5 years for a first strategy, to make use of the analysis with it and to act. Therefore, I will start with the scoping exercise, which you actually did. But before saying that, actually, there are plenty of different tools for strategizing. Some you might be familiar. Therefore, we are providing you some steps on how to strategize. But if you are familiar with another methodology or strategy, please use those, because the most important is that you strategize it in the best way that you can communicate about it to the people that are concerned with the changes you want to bring about. So for the scoping, you already did it in your agri-economic development case, because you cannot deal with everything. Even when you want to do your analysis, you need to know what you are looking for. Therefore, the scope of your case is very important. Otherwise, you can collect a lot of data, but it's so many data that you don't know anymore what you can do with it. But once you have your scope, you have your boundaries, you know what you are looking for, you know the context that you have to dig in further. Therefore, the 3 P's are very important: the place, the production zone, the commodity, the producers, and the product and the subsector that they are linked with. The next step, once you have your scope, what is it that you want to achieve in 15-20 years' time? What's your dream with that scope, with that case that you delineated by defining your scope? What do you want to change? Why and for whom? These are the questions you can try to answer while you develop your vision. And actually, we have some more explanation in the guiding documents on how you can develop a vision. One opportunity would be to use a rich picture if you do it together with your stakeholders. One of the tools that we already shared with OPPO trainees of the Pacific. So that's one of the methodologies you can use. But we need to know where we want to go to be able to pave the step forward our vision. So the analysis tools gives you an idea on the current situation, and your vision is where you want to go. And our strategy is how to define how we will go towards that vision. Therefore, the vision is quite important, because it just creates more boundaries so that you can focus your efforts. The next step that we suggest, what Ted explained you in the first part of this presentation, is how to bring all the challenges and opportunities that you identified through the use of different OPPO tools. It's to bring them together, which you already compiled. You can already compile with the help of the tables that we provided you in this guidance document. We want you to do that so that you can review, because the opportunity of using different tools is also to look at the situation from different angles. Therefore, the challenges and the opportunities that you might have identified in one tool by the use of one tool might be different in the use of another tool. So it's good to cross-check and to see, okay, I analyze this situation from this perspective, this is what I got out from it, and when I use the other tool, I have totally different information, and then it's a good opportunity to review and check, and maybe go back to the field to see whether there are inconsistencies about it. And of course, to have an overview of the outcomes of all the tools. All the challenges and opportunities can be brought together in one table. That's one example to help you to bring down everything. All you need to do is actually to copy paste the opportunities and challenges that you already put in the previous exercises that are provided in the guidance document. This is a rich harvest. Like I said, it's all the opportunities and challenges that were brought from different perspectives. And once you have everything compiled in this table, we suggest you to go on with it interactively and use cards to make a new one, a new overview that you can visualize this way, because this can help you to play with it. Because all these challenges and opportunities that you linked with the intervention areas, once you put them together in the cards, it will help you to see more clearly the overlapping maybe challenges that you already identified, maybe challenges that are the same but yet they're formulated differently, then you can merge them. So it's really to help you to condense all the outcomes that you generated from your analysis of the use of the different tools. You recognize the intervention areas. I'm looking again if I have a no pointer, and I don't. Therefore, you see agri-inputs, agricultural practices, agri-finance. These are the intervention areas that we always look upon, because most of the time the experience shows that the interventions needed can be summarized with these topics. Therefore, we try to put our challenges and opportunities related to that, because it's also a way to help us to monitor our progress. When we, let's say, if we are a producer organization that is going through this process, once we have these performance areas and we bring our challenges and opportunities linked to those, we can more easily report the progress that we might have done in each of these areas. So taking stock, making sense of all the challenges you brought together, and try to understand overlapping ones, linking ones that needs to be reformulated, can be done with the cards. Second part is again reviewing, because we also need to look at it from a realistic point of view. We might have identified some challenges, but if it's not something that we can do anything about, then maybe we have to take it out. An example for that would be, let's say that in one commodity, if we have the pressure of another country producing the same commodity and selling it in a very low price, maybe there won't be a lot of things to do to change, because it's beyond our reach. Another country's commodity can be beyond our reach, therefore we might have to rethink of our challenge. It might not be realistic to have interventions to another country. The linkages, by the linkages we mean, because of course it's the agricultural sector we are talking about, so a challenge that we are maybe referring to an agro input can also have some linkages with the agricultural practices. An example for that would be if, for instance, we have agro inputs to chemicals to combat pests, maybe the wrong use of the chemical creates a problem in the yield, which can also be linked with agricultural practices. But actually a better example would be improving of yield. It can be because of not knowing how to do integrated pest management, and therefore maybe the wrong use of chemicals, and then those challenges are actually linked with each other. Therefore, to be able to overcome that challenge, we would have to look at the agricultural practices, but we would also have to look at which chemicals are used. Are they used properly? Do we know the amounts that should be and the times where it should be applied to the commodity? So this process is really to review whether it's continuing to make sense and see whether there are linkages that could also help us to concentrate our efforts when doing an intervention. And sometimes, if we talk about integrated pest management, because of trying to improve yield, this is a contributing factor for both intervention areas. So we can formulate them in a way that they contribute to each other and brings us forward in 2-3 interventions areas. Are there things that can be merged? I already explained it in the first one. And are there any challenges that are missing? Because when we bring all the challenges together, they might not have came up out from the analysis, but when you bring all the information together, you can realize that, oh, we have those challenges, but actually we missed to add this one, and this is the step where you can do it. Next is to reorganize them. After reviewing it, it's advised to reposition them in a logical flow. So which challenges do I need to address first so that I can start to address the next one? So again, playing with the card and keeping the linkages also with the other challenges, we try to make a logical flow that will slowly take us to each of the challenges to be addressed. Next, we link the opportunities that we identify to the challenges, because this also helps us to prioritize a bit. Throughout all the exercises or the analysis tools you used, you also try to identify opportunities. Therefore, it's important to use them to see which of the opportunities are concentrated where, and which challenges it will help us to address. And you can see that you can, of course, this is just an example that is made out of the methodology, but then when you see concentrations like that, then you know that you have to look at it more deeply to see, do I have a chance to address those challenges without having to have more effort or without having to use a lot of resources. But then towards strategizing, the opportunities are one way of prioritizing. I have difficulties with this word. Help me out. Prioritization. But it's not the only one. Because of course, when you strategize, you have to remember that all the challenges and opportunities that you collected come from an analysis that you made through communicating with different stakeholders. Therefore, when you strategize and you prioritize, you need to have the justification of it. Therefore, it's quite important to develop criteria on how you are going to strategize, prioritize the areas that you can focus in the 3 to 5 years. We shared with you a list, non-exhaustive list of criteria that you can use, that are used in different areas of development. But it's even better if you can develop those criteria together with your members. I'm still assuming that we are a farmer organization that is undertaking this strategy analysis. Because if you develop it together with your members, of course, you might not have everyone with you, but then you can have a story that is accountable, because you can say, we selected these criteria with the support of our members. And of course, the criteria is because you will not be able to address all the challenges that you identified, and therefore you need to be able to communicate the justification of why it was not prioritized, because some stakeholders will deem it important and feel neglected. Therefore, it's important to communicate it. So some of the example is the relevance of the challenge, the urgency, the resources that are available to address the challenge, the political feasibility. Is the political environment, atmosphere conducive or hindering the addressing of the challenge? So there are different areas that you can take up as criteria to choose your strategies. And once you have identified your criteria and that you already have an idea of how much the opportunities will support the addressing of the challenges, you can start to cluster them. This is just an example. Like here, I see many opportunities and some challenges that are linked with each other, but then if I also address these challenges, I can have linkages with other challenges that they can contribute to each other, and so I cluster them according the criteria that would have been developed, and those are my strategies. So it's a strategy analysis. For me, in the coming 3 years, I can only address these 3 areas because of the criteria I identified. Then we come to the formulation of outcomes and plan activities, because here we are still with the challenges and activities. We need to know our objectives to identify our road ahead, our milestones that we will try to reach towards our vision. So we analyzed our strategies and we know the clusters that we want to focus on. Now we need to go on towards our action planning. So therefore we first need to know our primary outcomes and intermediary outcomes so that we can plan the activities to reach them. Remember, we said we cluster them, so this is our strategy analysis. In this step what we do is very straightforward, easy. We formulate our challenges as outcomes. For instance, this cluster, because it's about value creation, my first one, post-harvest value creation, I can have a primary outcome like identifying the opportunities along the value chain for post-harvest value creation can be my primary outcome in X commodity in X region, because I have my scope. And once I identified that, I clustered, I gave a name to my cluster, then I start to formulate my challenges as intermediary outcomes. So the in-between steps that will help me to reach my primary outcome. So transforming challenges to outcome. This is just about formulating the challenges. And once I did that, I need to check once again the coherence of my primary and intermediary outcomes. And of course I shouldn't lose the linkages with the big pictures, because you made an analysis and you try to link and look at the challenges in a way that you can bring them together, and then now you are taking clusters. Therefore you have to keep an eye on the linkages that you had. Once you have your intermediary outcome, although you already checked that with your challenges, trying to see, okay, what is the logical flow of the challenges so that I can address them, you redo it for your intermediary outcome. Because sometimes you might have some intermediary outcomes that you haven't thought about because you come from the challenges. It's important to see what are all the outcomes that you need so that you can use your primary outcome. Therefore, it's a kind of reassessing, reviewing the coherence of the challenges that you try to make sense of. And once you have your primary outcomes and the second and the third one, depending on how many strategies you identified from your analysis, of course, we keep on repeating that because it's a good way of assessing performance also. The linkages with the intervention areas. The outcomes that you are trying to address, whether intermediary or primary, how do they link to the different intervention areas? Because, of course, they are all linked. If you try to do something on agro input, if we take up again on the example of the chemicals, for instance, like one of the examples that we give in the guiding document, you need to know which agrochemicals, for instance, are allowed in your country. Therefore, you need to know the enabling environment, which includes the policy environment. So what are the law and regulations? If your commodity is produced for an export market, then it's not only your country's law and regulation, you also have to know the residues that are allowed in the country of destination. So that's why it's important to try to look in the different areas. And also, depending on the commodity, what are the agricultural practices that are in place? Is there any changes that needs to be done so that they have a better yield or a better quality product? Are areas that you will always have to check to see whether something is contributing to that intervention area. So that's how you check again and again how the things are linked, how the outcomes are linked, because the linkages between intermediary outcomes are also important, because sometimes you might have resources to do one activity, but if you design it well, you might contribute to the addressing or to the activities that will bring to intermediary outcome as an output. So important to see how you can be the most efficient in using your resources by keeping the linkages between outcomes. And now we talk about planning, but this is what I just said. All your outcomes, you always try to see the linkages with the intervention areas, which I just explained in the previous slide. I can't say it enough, how important it is to try to keep the linkages. For action planning, you need a brainstorming process again, because that's the process where you start to think, okay, what type of activities do I need to be able to reach my outcomes? What are the logistic operational activities that I need? Is there any capacity building activities that I need to undertake? Are there any communication activities that needs to be developed? And when I talk about capacity building communication activity, think also especially on the stakeholder collaboration part, because most of the time, to be able to reach certain outcomes, there are always stakeholders that are linked. Therefore, it's important from the beginning to identify the communication activities that you need to do, so that you don't do that at the end of the process, where it's going to be more difficult to get the support of a specific stakeholder if the activity is linked to others. What resources to have, and the communication activities are also very helpful to find additional resources that can come from another stakeholder because of some activities they might be carrying on already. What resources do I have? Do I have the human resources that can take up the activities to reach my outcomes, internal, or do I need any experts to help me, support me in reaching the outcome? Do I have the financial resources? Do I always need financial resources? Are there outcomes that I can reach without requiring financial resources, but then my social capital will help me to reach them out? It's important to try to understand which activities requires what type of resources. Physical resources, do I need a storage place, for instance? If I don't have it, do I have another stakeholder that can provide me some space until I can have my own type of activities? Are things that you can think of. So this is really about thinking one by one each of your intermediary outcomes and the activities you need to undertake to be able to reach them. And of course, again, always keep an eye on the intervention areas. So the action planning, as explained, very straightforward. It's the activities that will help you to reach your intermediary outcomes. And sometimes you might have activities that will be linked or the same as in another primary outcome too, for instance. So because it is not a structural linear process that we are in, therefore it's important to see the linkages and the activities that can be overlapping, so that you are not detached from your own strategy and that you are aware of it, of course. We are coming to an end. Actually, once you have identified all your activities, you have your action plan for the coming 3 to 5 years. So all your activities that are linked to your intermediary outcome will help you to reach out your primary outcomes. Here you can see that I wrote strategy and learning loop review, update and strategizing, because strategies are not stable documents. They are dynamic living documents, because when you start to implement them, you get new information, and sometimes you might need to adapt because of the learning process you went through. Therefore, you should always have an eye on it and monitor it to see whether you need to adapt anything or you need to change something because you grasped it in a different way at the first place, and then you have a better information. Maybe some outcomes might not will not be needed because of the new information you acquired. So you always have to have monitoring, learning and adaptation process throughout the implementation. But then once the 3 to 5 years is gone, you actually go back to your initial analysis, try to update the information. You can use the same tools, you can use different tools, you can add the information that you gathered throughout the implementation, and then you re-strategize until you get to your vision. So it's a loop that will go on for your business case. For the implementation, this is my last slide about the steps. again, because you collected all the information from the different stakeholders to be able to come to your strategies, and because you cannot cover all of them in one strategy period, it's important to give the linkages. To be able to show your performance, how you progressed with the implementation of the strategy you developed, and if you made changes in the strategy, to be able to justify those changes. For your accountability and to be able to establish trust, you need to be able to clearly explain what you did and why you did it and why you prioritized A over B, for instance. And that would be it for the action planning process. So basically, we are talking about 3 steps. The first one that Ted explained, the identification of challenges and opportunities, and to bring them all together, linked with the interventions areas that we are suggesting. The second phase, the planning, where you define, you clarify your scope, identify your vision, and develop your strategy by undertaking a strategy analysis. And finally, do your action planning linked with the intermediary and primary outcomes that you formulated based on the strategy analysis you did. We strongly suggest, as each time, to use the document, Strategic Orientations and Planning for Action. Everything is detailed in the document, but you also know that you can always email us to ask for your questions. And thank you for your attention.